Believers who feel alone often carry a calling others can't carry, not because they're better or more spiritual, but because some assignments are so specific, so demanding, so contrary to what the majority accepts, that they require a kind of solitude most people will never understand. The loneliness isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's often a sign that something is right, that God has marked you for a work that can't be done in the comfort of consensus or the safety of the crowd. You've felt it your entire life, that persistent sense of being set apart, even when you're surrounded by people. You can be in a room full of believers and still feel like you're speaking a different language. You can attend every gathering, participate in every conversation, and still carry a weight that no one else seems to notice or understand. It's not that you don't want connection, it's that the connections available don't reach the depth of what you're carrying. And the isolation isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. You see things others don't see. You feel burdens others don't feel. You wrestle with questions others aren't asking. And when you try to share what's on your heart, you're met with blank stares, shallow responses, or well-meaning advice that completely misses the point. So eventually, you stop trying. You learn to carry it alone because carrying it alone is easier than trying to explain it to people who can't comprehend it. But here's what the enemy wants you to believe: that the loneliness means you're broken, that the isolation means you're doing something wrong, that if you were more normal, more relatable, more like everyone else, you'd finally have the community you crave. And so you've spent years trying to fit, trying to minimize what you carry so others feel comfortable around you, trying to lighten the weight so people don't feel the heaviness when they're near you. But what if the loneliness isn't a problem to solve? What if it's a position God has placed you in because the calling He's given you requires it? What if the isolation is the environment where the most essential parts of your assignment are being forged? Elijah stood alone on Mount Carmel, 450 prophets of Baal on one side, the entire nation of Israel watching from the other. And Elijah, by himself, calling down fire from heaven. He didn't have a team. He didn't have a support system. He didn't even have one other prophet standing with him. He had God, and that had to be enough. And after the fire fell, after the victory was undeniable, after the prophets of Baal were defeated, Elijah ran. He fled into the wilderness, sat under a tree, and begged God to take his life, because the weight of standing alone had crushed him. The isolation of carrying a calling no one else could carry had brought him to the edge of complete collapse. But God didn't rebuke him for feeling alone. God didn't tell him to pull himself together or stop being so emotional. God sent an angel to feed him. God let him sleep. God met him in the cave and spoke to him in a whisper. And then, only after all of that, God told him the truth. You're not as alone as you think. There are 7,000 others who haven't bowed to Baal. But here's the critical detail. Those 7,000 weren't on the mountain with him. They weren't standing beside him when he called down fire. They weren't visible when he needed them most. They existed, but they weren't accessible. And that's the reality of carrying a calling others can't carry. You're not the only one, but you'll often feel like you are, because your assignment doesn't allow you the luxury of constant visible support. Jeremiah carried a word no one wanted to hear. He prophesied to a nation that refused to listen. He wept over a people who mocked him, and God told him explicitly, "Do not pray for this people. Do not intercede for them. You are not here to make them comfortable. You are here to speak what I give you to speak, whether they listen or not." Jeremiah wasn't alone because he was unlovable. He was alone because his calling required him to stand in opposition to everything his culture celebrated. He couldn't join the optimistic prophets, who promised peace when there was no peace. He couldn't participate in the religious gatherings that had become empty rituals. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine when God was showing him that judgment was coming. His loneliness was the cost of obedience, and that obedience produced a book of scripture that has sustained believers through exile, persecution, and suffering for thousands of years. The calling he carried alone is still carrying others today. Paul understood this completely. He had companions, co-laborers, churches that loved him. But when it mattered most, he stood alone. At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. He wrote those words from prison, alone, abandoned, facing execution, and yet, he didn't collapse into bitterness or self-pity. He said, "But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength." The loneliness wasn't evidence that Paul had failed. It was evidence that his calling was so costly, so dangerous, so misunderstood, that most people couldn't stay with him through it. And Paul accepted that. He didn't demand that people understand. He didn't require that people stay. He simply kept moving forward with the ones who could, and entrusted the rest to God. If you carry a calling others can't carry, your loneliness is not a mistake. It's a necessary part of the process. Some assignments can only be completed in isolation, because isolation is the only environment where you can hear clearly, move quickly, and obey fully without the interference of human opinion, fear, or limitation. God isn't punishing you with loneliness. He's protecting you with it. He's removing the voices that would talk you out of obedience. He's separating you from the crowds that would dilute your focus. He's positioning you in a place where you have no choice but to depend entirely on Him. Because if you could depend on people, you would. And that dependence would compromise everything He's called you to do. This doesn't mean you'll never have community. It means your community will be small, selective, and seasonal. The people who can walk with you through this calling will be rare, and they won't stay forever. They'll come for a season, contribute what God assigned them to contribute, and then move on. And you'll have to let them go without bitterness, without clinging, without demanding they stay longer than God intended. Because your calling isn't about gathering people around you. It's about carrying what God has given you to carry, regardless of who's watching, who's helping, or who even understands. Your assignment is between you and God, and the loneliness is simply the space where that assignment is being worked out in real time. Moses spent 40 years in the desert with sheep. Noah spent 120 years building an ark while the entire world mocked him. John the Baptist lived in the wilderness eating locusts and honey, isolated from the religious systems of his day. Jesus himself spent 40 days alone in the wilderness, being tempted by the devil before he ever began public ministry. Isolation wasn't optional for any of them. It was required, because the calling they carried was too weighty, too significant, too opposed by the spirit of the age to be developed in the noise of constant companionship. They needed the silence. They needed the solitude. They needed the uninterrupted time with God to become who they needed to be before they could do what they were called to do. And you're in that wilderness right now, not because you're being punished, not because you're defective, but because what God is preparing you for is so specific, so powerful, so contrary to the spirit of this age, that it can only be forged in the fire of isolation. So stop apologizing for the loneliness. Stop trying to fix it by forcing connections that don't fit. Stop begging people to understand a calling they were never meant to carry. Instead, accept it, lean into it, let it do the work it's meant to do. Let it strip away your need for human approval. Let it silence the voices that would lead you away from obedience. Let it create the space where God's voice is the only voice that matters. Because one day, and it may be sooner than you think, the assignment you've been carrying in secret will go public. The calling you've been stewarding in isolation will be released into the open, and the loneliness that felt like a curse will be revealed as the gift that prepared you for a moment most believers will never be ready for. You'll speak, and people will listen. You'll lead, and people will follow. You'll build, and people will come. Not because you fought for their attention, but because you were faithful in the place where no one was watching. Not because you demanded recognition, but because you carried what God gave you to carry without needing anyone's permission or applause. The calling you carry alone today is the calling that will sustain others tomorrow. Hold it, protect it. Don't dilute it to make people comfortable. Don't minimize it to fit in. Don't abandon it because it's heavy. God gave it to you for a reason, and the loneliness you feel is simply proof that you're exactly where you need to be.